Now, Billy, at first glance, can seem like a really easy pickup, but once if I told you there's a lot more than meets the eye. From a ton of decision making and ability to outplay your opponent, here is the ultimate guide to understanding Billy. And if you have questions about the character, or ideas of what other videos you would like to see, let me know in the comments down below. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about Billy's abilities. Now, Billy's first ability is Bashdown, and as the name implies, you slam your bat into the ground, pulling enemies down and dealing melee damage. The slam creates a shockwave that knocks up and deals damage. Now, another thing that's rather interesting with this ability is that it can actually be held in order to hover in the air a bit longer and to be able to be a little bit more unpredictable. Now, this can be useful in a lot of different ways if you're trying to do a super late engage or even delayed engage, and you're just trying to be a little bit more unpredictable. Now, like I previously mentioned, when using Bashdown, it pulls enemies down, meaning if there's a lash, a 7, or something like that ulting in the air, you can pull them down. Now, this small detail can be useful in a lot of different scenarios if you don't have a knockdown on your team. Like I said, a pretty minor or niche detail that, sometimes you'll get rewarded, sometimes you won't. Now, like always, the first AP is a minus 10-second cooldown, the second being +1 charge and a 2-meter radius increase. While the fifth AP, you now deal 60% heavy melee damage and it reduces the charge time by 3 seconds with each hit. Now, Rising Ram is Billy's secondary ability and pretty much his movement ability, but basically you charge headfirst into an enemy and send them into the air. Now, the interesting thing about Rising Ram is that it can be used vertically if you jump, so it allows you to escape various scenarios and allows you to engage in unpredictable ways. Now, like always, the ability point order is 1 AP is on impact, you get plus 25% weapon damage for 5 seconds. 2 AP on impact is plus 0.4 seconds charge duration. Then the fifth and final AP is on impact, deal 10% max health as spirit damage and also reduce the cooldown by 13 seconds. Billy's third ability is Blasted and probably his main ability, I would say. Now, by passive, his melee hits restore ammo and inflict wrecked. During this time, light melee attacks are half as effective. But when you activate the ability, you empower your weapons against wrecked enemies. Gun damage is amplified and melee boosts max health. You deal weapon damage to extend the duration. So you want to be applying your wrecked passive ability with, just a normal melee, and then going into Blasted, empowering it after. Basically, this ability is pretty much your entire source of damage, or main damage and self-sustain. Now, the first ability point is while Blasted, you gain 2.25 movement bonus move speed. The second AP is +1 Bashdown charge on use and plus 5% wrecked bullet amp. The fifth and final ability point is plus 65 melee bonus health, so pretty significant when you're just trying to play Billy. Now, something small to keep in mind is that his slam also procs all melee items and Blasted siphon melee and reloads Billy's gun as well. Now, Billy's ultimate ability is a chain gang where you chain nearby enemies to you. Chained enemies cannot use movement abilities and receive a heavy slow when they pull on the chain. After the delay, you yank everyone towards Billy and deal spirit damage. Something, again, you want to keep in mind is that Chain Gang basically silences all movement abilities, similar to Slowing Hex, so it can easily catch heroes like Lash, Mina, Pocket, and so on. This is predominantly used as an engage tool, not really disengage, because you're trying to get away. Why would you pull people towards you if you're trying to leave? Now, with Chain Gang, the first ability point is plus 40% spirit and bullet resist. Second AP is minus 50-second cooldown, and the fifth AP is plus 5-meter radius, and on pull, you get 1.3 second unstoppable for each hero pulled in, so the more the merrier. Now, off rip, another thing to keep in mind is that it has a 12-meter range radius, meaning you still have to be decently close to the enemies in order to pull them towards you. That's why it's using items like Warpstone, Heroic Aura, or whatever the case may be to try to catch up to the enemies is usually a pretty good idea. I will have some gameplay in the background while I talk about some of Billy's strengths, weaknesses, combos, and everything like that. But like I said previously, if you like this type of content or want to see more, do me a favor, hit that like button, of course subscribe to the channel. Now let's talk about his strengths and of course weaknesses. Now, some of Billy's strengths, I will say currently he's one of the best frontlines in the entire game as if I'm recording this. But of course, that's all subject to change as time goes on. Now, one of his biggest strengths is that he has a ton of crowd control, so he's easily able to shut down a lot of the mobile characters in this game. His gun scaling is decent, and with Billy's innate bullet shred and melee reloads, makes him very consistent and does a ton of damage. He's also extremely durable, with easy ways to apply melee effects such as lifesteal, double dipping from blasted, siphon melee leeching, and Billy can end up having a strong sustain and a very large health pool. However, the weakness is that he can be easily kited once Rising Ram is used. Billy has no other ways of dodging or evading spells, of course, using stamina. Now, because Billy is such a heavy ability user, so using his abilities, unlike that of, say, an M1, I mean, it's not the best one-to-one example, but hopefully you get the picture, he has to use his abilities, meaning silences are a great way of shutting him down. Now, I think another weakness that this character has, some might disagree, some might agree, which is perfectly fine, but I think he has a relatively high skill cap usage, because you have to weave a ton of abilities with melees, and it might be a little bit confusing if you're picking up the character for the very first time. Now, like a lot of melee range characters, Billy is heavily reliant on properly performing his combos correctly. Billy's actual combo routes are somewhat flexible, but the end goal is almost always optimized blasted uptime and damage output. Remember, any melee damage will proc correct on an enemy, so you can open your combos in 3 different ways: light melee, heavy melee, and Bashdown. You can also alternatively use Rising Ram to close the distance and guarantee either a Bashdown proc or a melee hit with its knockup. Use any of these methods to open and then cast Blasted to buff yourself and play the fight from there. So some examples for a combo will be Rising Ram into a light melee, into Bashdown, into a heavy melee, into a mouse 1, so just shooting your gun. So again, Rising Ram, your 2, into a light melee, which is whatever you have your melee button set to. If you're on default keyboard and mouse settings, Q, into Bashdown, which is 1, into a heavy melee, followed up by this shooting the target. Ultimate can be inserted into combos as pretty much any point, and it does not stop you from casting other abilities or shooting or even punching. So adding in a chain gang and any sort of way inside of that combo is definitely some of the ways you want to be approaching it. Now let's talk about how to fight as Billy. So Billy is a close range engaged brawler who relies on constantly proccing his passive to optimize damage through M1 and his melee. His abilities have respectable spirit scaling that makes them, decent burst threats with the right item investment. He has amazing playmaking potential with his ability to disrupt entire teamfights using his ultimate chain gang, and you have a fluid approach to teamfighting, able to go either front to back or back to front. He could be both primary engage or a devastating follow-up. He's a decent frontliner, and probably one of the better frontliners in the game currently, especially when ahead or building the correct sustain items. However, the nature of his combo and need to stay constantly moving means that you are basically always playing on a timer. You can hold enemies' attention in short bursts before you need to either retreat and heal up before re-engaging or look for a target to isolate so you can heal via passive melee procs. If I had to summarize Billy's approach to fights, it would be broadly: get in, drop your combo on a priority target, use your ult either to isolate someone or to disrupt as many people as possible, sustain through a passive for as long as possible, then get out as quickly as possible. Now, I do want to really emphasize on Billy's laning phase because sometimes it can be quite complex, especially if you're newer to the character. The character is sort of similar to Shiv and or Lash in the way that your neutral pressure is fairly weak, so rely on your lane partner to manage wave whilst you look for openings to spend your cooldowns, harassing the enemy, or going all in for a single kill. And that certainly is true because when you think of Shiv in the neutral, when he doesn't have his nice, he might not do as much damage as you might think. The same thing with Lash when you have to hyper-emphasize on using his abilities to really get a lot of damage out. Not saying that they're weak in the neutral per se, but a lot more weak in comparison to some of the other characters in the game. Now, your gun is solid and you can manage waves on your own to some degree, and denying enemy soul orbs is also fairly easy. The first decision you make in lane is whether you're going to prioritize melee in your early fights or if you're playing in low skill brackets where players are notoriously really bad at parrying. It's usually a pretty safe bet to grab an early melee charge and look to smack them out of them every single fight. However, against really good players, getting parried is a total death sentence early. Be smart and stick to light melees to proc items like melee lifesteal, spirit snatch, spirit strike, and you want to invest in melee charge and look for guaranteed heavy melee hits following up on crowd control. As always, make sure to get an extra charge, as having 2 Bashdowns is massively easy and massively nice. Now, outside of the laning phase, the roaming stage, I would say, Billy is a very effective mid-game roamer, and his ult is one of the best ganking tools in the entire game. Coupling this with how relatively inexpensive his items are, makes him for a great roamer in the earlier mid-game. If your lane is stable or you are laning with a carry, you want to get a lot of solo resources, you want to look to leave the lane early and often and make plays for the rest of your team around the map. Billy is really good for contesting the rifts and contesting urns as well, helping snowball already ahead lanes and taking neutral camps. Jungle camps remain a great source of consistent economy throughout the whole game for Billy. He farms them pretty fast and can proc his passive on neutral monsters, letting him stay healthy and do high tier camps safely from fairly early into the match. So it's kind of the same presence of, other ganking characters. You leave your carry in the lane, you go gank another lane, and while you're going to gank a lane, you're getting boxes or you're hitting one of the camps, and then you're coming back to lane and you're just repeating this process. Now, in terms of matchups, Billy doesn't have too many horrible matchups or hard counters necessarily, but he's very vulnerable to consistent poke damage early. So these are characters like Geist, Mirage, Haze, and Furnace Great Talon, and the nature of his itemization means that he's often has a gap in his defensive versus specific type of damage depending on the game. So that is something to watch out for. He also doesn't want to find himself in drawn-out solo fights versus people who do what he does to more extreme degrees. For example, a good Abrams player is going to he might win the 1v1 melee duel, and a good Haze player will probably win the 1v1, but good Haze players don't really exist. Let's be honest. And you're not really looking to take necessary fair fights. You're mainly looking to get the jump on people so that they have no idea that you're coming for them or trying to gank them. That is the nature of this character. You're playing the unpredictability factor. Now to round out this video, I do want to do some quick fire tips and, I guess tricks, I would say. So as a melee focused character, learning the course of Deadlock's melee mechanics is super important. So you want to make sure you get a hand of heavy canceling, fake outs, and how to guarantee your heavy melee. It's all mind games at the end of the day with melee oriented characters, walking people down so that they parry without you doing anything, and just trying to understand how to be not predictable with your melees. Following that, Bashdown has a slightly weird two-part hitbox, so you want to lap it to get the muscle memory or buy Mystic Expansion if you're really struggling to land it when you need to. Now, one last thing with his chain gang. When using Chain Gang, you attach yourself to all enemies within its AoE. The chains do not instantly break when leaving the AoE or breaking line of sight, and instead there is a period where they remain. You can abuse this to tether extra enemies or pull them farther than otherwise possible. Just remember that enemies are still subject to normal source physics and can get caught on different sorts of terrain. But anyways, hopefully this was a, decent introduction or understanding of how to play Billy. And like always, if you're new here and haven't done so already, make sure to hit that like button. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.